But now I don't see those cobbles and curbs. I don't hear the blues anymore.
Rough Trade is giving away a third of the first 3 months of the Rough Trade Club plus new music membership exclusively to 101 Part-Time Jobs listeners. Become a member of Rough Trade Club New Music and you'll receive the Rough Trade Album of the Month straight to your door every month on exclusive vinyl pressing with exclusive bonus material. Club members have received exclusive pressings of albums from Sufjan Stevens, Sprints, The Last Dinner Party, Julie Byrne, and Over Mono, just to name a few, this past year alone. Sign up using the promo code CLUB101POD and you'll get the Rough Trade Album of the Month, English Teacher's excellent debut album, This Could Be Texas, on exclusive Galaxy Gold for a third of the usual price. Here's English Teacher on a recent episode of 101.
How many opportunities do you get to write a debut album and have all of this, sport behind us? I don't know. I really like the idea of holding the bar as being like classic songs.
You only get one shot at a debut.
Don't want the album of the month but still want all the benefits? Sign up to the standard tier using Club 101 Pod and you'll still get the first month free. You'll also get free shipping on all orders, 10% off the bar and on secondhand vinyl in store, and exclusive access to sold out Rough Trade events. So don't hang around. Go to roughtrade.com/club and sign up with the code CLUB101POD. That's CLUB101POD and claim money off the album of the month, English Teachers This Could Be Texas, today. This offer's available to UK residents only. Do you play in bands? I did for the longest time. And I wish that I knew that DistroKid was a thing. I don't even think it existed back then. DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists keep 100% of your royalties and earnings. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all the major streaming services. When you get DistroKid, you can see a DistroKid bank and withdraw your earnings. You get notified when you've earned royalties and you can withdraw via the app. And you can even check your streaming stats on Spotify and Apple. Get 30% off your first year on DistroKid by going to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod. 30% off for your first year. That's not bad. We know it's a tough world out there. Why don't you make it easier for yourself? And to get 30% off that free year as an artist, where you get 100% of your royalties and earnings, go to distrokid.com/VIP/101pod. All right, stay with me. I'll be right back after this.
Hey there. Did you know Baker's always gives you savings and rewards on top of our lower than low prices? And when you download the Baker's app, you'll enjoy over $500 in savings every week with digital coupons. And don't forget fuel points to help you save up to $1 per gallon at the pump. Want to save even more? With a Boost membership, you'll get double fuel points and free delivery. So shop and save big at Baker's today. Baker's, fresh for everyone. Savings may vary by state. Restrictions apply. See site for details.
The Vietnam War, it's over. Your job's just begun.
A new HBO original limited series.
Welcome to the world of spycraft. Strap in.
From executive producers Park Chan-wook and Robert Downey Jr.
What are you concealing?
Based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel by Viet Thanh Nguyen.
What if I told you that I was a communist spy?
How did you become this?
The Sympathizer, streaming April 14th on Max. Subscription required.
Okay, you're listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs with me, Giles Bidder. It's the podcast where I speak to musicians about how they've been able to sustain themselves. Playing music takes a lot of money out of you, and to keep on finding part-time jobs is a job in itself. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to bring out these stories that we've never heard before. And today's episode is different, but the same. I'm speaking to Norman Brannon, who has started Antimatter Zine again. He started it in the 90s and then stopped at some point and came back last year to reflect, well, an ever-changing genre and ever-changing cultures. Every town, every city across the world has roots in punk and hardcore, and now is such an exciting time for that kind of music and these kinds of communities. And Norman is doing an amazing job at reflecting some of that and getting these stories via newsletter form. Every time I get an email from him, I stop whatever I'm doing and I spend 10 minutes devouring this great piece of writing. He sparks my imagination, and I think he has lots of others as well, because hardcore, by virtue of being DIY and something anyone can just about do if they can get hold of a guitar and drums and instruments and a place to practice, is a hugely empowering and life-affirming thing to be part of. Norman right now is on tour with Thursday. He was in Texas Is the Reason, who we talk about. He was in New End Original and also Shelter. So he's lived a life in punk rock and hardcore growing up in New York. And that's where we start with this conversation. Thanks so much for listening to 101 Part-Time Jobs. If you enjoy this episode, make sure that you subscribe, that you leave a review if you've got 30 seconds and you really want to. Thank you for listening. I love doing these interviews. When I reached out to Norman, it was like, yo, I love what you're doing. It inspires me to do more of what I'm doing. This is my thesis of punk rock and hardcore, much like so many other people. And yeah, I just wanted to get his story about starting Antimatter again. So cheers for listening. Thanks to our sponsors, 2000 Trees Festival. If you're into any of the bands that Norman's been in, you will dig 2000 Trees. It's in Cheltenham, which is just a few hours away from London on the train. This year, the Gaslight Anthem are headlining the Thursday. Hot Mulligan are playing, and they've just announced a whole stack of bands. The Chats are headlining, Creepers playing, Nova Twins, Hot Mulligan, did I already say them? Boston Manor, Manchester Orchestra, Spanish Love Songs, Turnover, Movements, Angel Dust, Into It Over It. Damn, I'm looking at the flyer now, and there are so many great bands I want to see. Meryl Streak, The Nightmares. Yeah, if you want to go to a festival in the UK this July, head to 2000 Trees. It's won the best medium-sized festival at the UK Festival Awards so many times. I've been years in row. I've always had a great time. Always come back with a great feeling. 2000trees.co.uk to get your tickets.
Introducing Ampolo, the new app for musicians. Using AI stem separation, play along to any song, improving your practice and performance. Record audio or video and connect with musicians all over the world. Collaborating and creating together. Think Google Docs meets TikTok, but for musicians. There's a huge range of video and audio editing tools, and the best part, it's free. Download today and make your mark. Ampolo, made for music.
Ampolo is the place to learn your instrument, find people online to play it with, share your music, just get good at enjoying your instrument at home. That's what it's about. It's getting good at enjoying it. I need to remember that myself sometimes. Hey, this is Norman Brannon on 101 Part-Time Jobs. I hope you enjoy this chat. 101 Part-Time Jobs.
I'm a very self-aware person, and I know that I'm self-aware enough to know that when I decide that I like something, I kind of go all in. Mm-hmm. And that's a very dangerous thing a dangerous way to be with certain things. And so that's why I've never smoked pot. I've never done anything like that, because I feel like, there's just a little bit of a concern that I might be like, oh, I like that. And then you'll just never see me again.
Mm-hmm. And was that it with music? Was that it with playing guitar? You know, I'm talking the first band that you had that played a gig and released a demo or went to record. Were these kinds of were those personality traits, were they coming out then for you?
Yeah, I mean, there were two things specifically. So one was the first time I walked out on stage and felt like I'd earned the applause was like a completely different animal. And that was very much like, you know, for someone who grew up with very little reassurance or encouragement or good job, kiddo, to get that applause, not going to lie, intoxicating. I was like, wow, they like me. They're validating me. I'm going to do this forever. So,
and was part of that, do you think that you'd been practicing and you'd been putting brain work into it as a collective with your bandmates? It was something that you'd made, you didn't, no one else told you to create that music. You took the initiative and you did it yourself.
Yeah, because I didn't feel it until Texas Is the Reason. Like I had been in, like in the early 90s, I was in a band called Fountainhead. But when I was in the band, we were playing shows and, people thought we were fine, but it was, it wasn't like we walked on and everybody was like, yeah,
Yeah,
it was just fine. And then after that, it was just a series of other people's bands. I played in Resurrection, who were fairly popular, but again, I didn't feel like I'd earned that. I played in 108, who were pretty instantly popular, and I didn't feel like I earned that. And then I played in Shelter, who were probably the biggest band of 1993. And I definitely hadn't earned that. I knew that everyone was there to see Ray and Purcell. So when Texas Is the Reason clicked with people and it became a thing that people were excited about, that was the moment. That was the thing that made me feel like, oh, I could do this forever.
Had you, by that point, had you already kind of got some kind of structure in your mind? I mean, that's something I think a lot about with this show, is that idea that you're giving yourself, you're delegating yourself roles. And in this big or small thing of music at large, or punk rock and hardcore in its own world, it's quite an abstract thing, isn't it? I'm not trying to make it self-congratulatory. I find it interesting that, whether you're a writer or a journalist or you're doing any hobbies, to take that work and think and do, I'm going to give myself structure and discipline to do this without any immediate return.
Right. There are a lot of different ways to do these types of things that I do. And I think that the difference between how I've approached my work as both a musician and a writer has always been rooted in the reality of survival. And it was a thing for me where, I dropped out of high school. I didn't have any job experience whatsoever. When I dropped out of high school, my parents told me that I couldn't live in the house. So I left the house and I just had to figure it out. And so the three things that sort of happened simultaneously was, one, I sort of just asked around the hardcore scene and was like, I need a job. I'll do anything. And I was lucky enough that there was this health food store in the East Village. This is 1991, I want to say. And at the time, Chaka from Burn worked there. Mark from Supertouch worked there. Like Alan Cage used to work there. Jay from Eye for an Eye worked there at some point. So a lot of hardcore kids worked there. And at the time, Mark was the head manager. So he basically immediately was like, yeah, I got you. And he gave me a job. And then there was the other things, which were figuring out what I could do. And, those two things, writing music and writing words, were always the only things that I was interested in as a kid. And I just figured like there has to be a way that I can get by doing them. And, I think that was, it was a very unconscious opinion that I had, that I realize now, so many years later, people find controversial.
Controversial that you thought, I could do this? That
anyone would care that they could get by or make a living with anything related to hardcore. How dare you?
If you're selling t-shirts, you might be a shirt company.
Right. Right. And I mean, I guess I didn't have time for those types of hangups. I was like, I got to fucking eat, and I live in New York City and I got to pay rent. So either I'm going to miraculously find a job with zero job experience, or I'm going to try to do something really fucking good for the community that I am a part of. And hopefully they'll see it that way.
Mm-hmm. So you knew that was kind of at the outset. And we're talking about antimatter here.
Yeah.
And so the idea was, okay, I'm going to give back or contribute to this community that I feel so strongly about. And hope. And was there ever tension between like the monetary aspect of it? I mean, I suppose zines back in the day, you could ask people for a couple of quid or a couple of dollars and you wouldn't feel weird about it.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's funny because I was so young and I was still sort of thinking very businessy about it. But I started Antimatter when I was in Shelter, and I knew I was quitting Shelter. So Antimatter had to be the next thing, because at that point, Shelter was what was paying me. And I needed to find another job, basically. And so Antimatter kind of came to my mind because there were a lot of reasons for a zine like Antimatter to exist in 1993. And no one was really filling that bill. And I thought...
And what are we talking here? What kind of things, what points come to mind? Is it that people aren't necessarily talking about the politics of the music and the society?
So I would say there was a couple things. So one was that there was a brand new scene that had basically emerged out of nowhere, meaning that all of the kids who were young and buying the records in the 1980s came of age and started making their own bands. And then a lot of the bands who were from the 80s came of a different age and started making different sounding music. And people were confused. People didn't seem to know how to reconcile, the hardcore of the 80s with the stuff that was happening in the 90s, which at this point, everything just sounded so different, not just from the 80s, but from each other. It was like, one band was completely metal, one band was completely pop, one band was, I don't know what the fuck. It was a lot of stuff that was happening, and people were having a little bit of trouble kind of understanding this as one scene. And maybe this is my perspective because I live in New York. And I grew up in New York, and New York is a very family scene, right? Like, we give a shit about each other on a personal level. It's a very sort of like New York pride kind of thing. If you grew up here, you got it. And so there was never any question when Quicksand came out, right? That like, oh, here they are kind of playing mid-tempo rock music, but who gives a shit? We like them, right? There was never going to be that controversy about that, right? We had bands like Supertouch in the 80s who was Supertouch ever a fast hardcore band? Like, no. Like, they were singing about, trying to find self-realization in 1986. So it was like, we had this tradition already of bands that did different shit. Even the Bad Brains, you say they're from DC, we claim them as New York a lot of times, But Bad Brains were playing reggae songs in 1981. So we don't have a problem with expanding the parameters of hardcore, and we see each other as community. So I just thought I need to bring this outlook out to the world, right? I need to make people understand that Shudder to Think and Cause for Alarm come from the same place. And they may sound wildly different, but they are more in common than they are not. And that was sort of a role that I think Antimatter played, and I think I played it well.
Kerrang and NME, to a lesser extent, they made me make sense of this music and these ideas that I loved, and to have it all in one place where you could get the voices and the opinions and the personalities of these people. That is what really came out of the pages to me.
Well, that was another aspect that I thought no one was really doing at that time. And I always give credit where credit is due. There was a fanzine in the 80s called No Answers, a guy from California named Kent McClard. And as far as I'm concerned, Kent McClard kind of invented Antimatter. He just didn't know it. I very much absorbed a lot of what he did because his interviews were not... The first thing you notice about his interviews were that they were really focused on the people. They were really focused on the feelings. They were really focused on what was happening in your life. And it wasn't so much like, so tell me about making the new album. like he didn't seem to care, and neither did I. And that's why I loved his interviews. Right?
Yeah.
And then he also had a lot of like guts. Like he would write these essays that were, you know, that in the 80s were really bold. There was this one essay. I remember it because I'm gay and I was not out in the 80s at all. And he wrote this essay, and I remember the first line in the essay was, "Sometimes I think I'm gay." And I was like, whoa, like for a dude to say that in the hardcore scene in like 1988 or 1989, that's bold.
Right.
And so those bold strokes, and it was also, you know, No Answers visually was a beautiful fanzine. It was printed on quality paper. It was designed well. It was really everything that I tried to move over into Antimatter, because after he closed No Answers, there was nothing like it. And so I kind of felt like, okay, let me start there.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see what he did, what he established, and let me build on that and make it my voice. And that's sort of how it started.
And you got this satisfaction from it. I don't know if it's just something that, you know, sometimes you just notice particular phrases that you hear over time, over years. But one thing that I read about writers a lot is that it's a compulsion, or it's kind of beyond a desire. It's something that you have to do. You have to do it. It's almost a kind of condition.
It can be, but it can also be a sickness that feels bad. And so there have been times in my life where I'm like, nope, not going to write. And I will just sort of, you know, leave it be.
Right.
This experience relaunching Antimatter in June, it's been a really sort of wild experience for me, because I've never had to be so on deadline every week for this long.
For yourself, though, right?
For myself, but I mean, not really. I think once I got your first paid subscriber, you're working for the man now.
You're working for the many.
Yeah. So it's like there's a lot of people who, you know, and I got to say, like, the people who subscribe, who are paid subscribers to Antimatter, my love for them knows no bounds, because I don't actually offer anything special if you pay. Like, I essentially just ask that if you feel like you're getting something out of this, show that and support that, and put your money into the things that you want to see continue and grow.
Right.
And so far, a decent amount of people have decided to do that, and it's made me feel like the project has value, like a broad value, and it makes me want to really, you know, hit those deadlines every week and really put out something quality, something that I'm proud of.
I think now more than ever is a time where you know that any kind of penny that you spend is going to someone. And so if you know that you can spend money on something that you really do enjoy, that on an individual level, and it's an independent creator, there's a mutual relationship there between the subscriber and you.
Absolutely. And I mean, you know, I was talking to a friend the other day, and he was like, I don't know. He's like, I kind of feel like it's a no-brainer. He's like, it's literally $1.25 a week.
Yeah.
And you're putting a lot of effort into it. He's like, I would feel like an idiot if I didn't pay.
When I get your emails, I stop what I'm doing and I put the kettle on and I sit down and read it on my phone. and it's great. I learn so much about the music that I've loved since a pretty young age. And I'm learning more every time I'm reading a newsletter. And I love the way that you tell us about your experiences, because the way there are so many musicians that we don't really know the stories of. And I want to hear more. I mean, that's why I do this. That's why we're speaking. And I'd like to hear more about that, more of the individual experience of punk and hardcore, but of any music, really.
But I think, and I think that's sort of the point. And in the introduction to this relaunch, I made a comment about how I never wanted to be seen as like, you know, this is some sort of like history project, because it's not. a personal history, maybe, because ultimately I'm very protective of everything I do with antimatter. And the reason for that is because this is not just, and I'm actually having some growing pains, I feel like, because I feel like modern journalists don't understand, or modern publicists don't understand. They think I'm a journalist. They think like, I get it. It looks like journalism. It sounds like journalism. I don't see what I do as journalism. I see it as an expression. As it's very much like my essays are very much just a personal expression. They're storytelling. And the people that I choose to interview are people that I genuinely feel have something to say, and whose work I respect in some way, or enjoy, or love. And it's not like you can just like hit me up on an email and be like, yo, this band has a new album out. We're doing press. Would you like to, it's like, that's not, I'm not going to do a phoner. Like, you're writing about stuff that you like and people that you find interesting. Right. It's kind of like, don't call me, I'll call you. Like, and I feel like it's a very personal thing. It's just not, it's not something that I think a lot of people are used to, because I also think that a lot of people, when they start publications, they want that attention from publicists. They want the advanced records and all that stuff, but I don't review records, so I don't need to really hear your advanced record. Like, I do keep the AM radio playlist, which is, a selection of new music, but that's that's another thing that I'm very protective of. Yeah. That's music that I really like, period. It has nothing to do with anything else. I don't care. Like, I don't listen to music thinking my audience would like this. If I'm not personally attached to it, it doesn't go on the playlist, because I listen to that playlist. Right. That's basically my personal playlist of new hardcore and punk that I like. That's your group message with your friends, being like, this is what I'm listening to. Yeah. I think a lot about how growing up and reading music magazines, those writers, those editors would shape the band or the artist for us. They would tell the band, even who would probably read it themselves, what that band is. Now, music journalism or personal blogs or podcasts or YouTubes, it's celebrating and giving a platform or kind of elevating what the artist or the band is. They're not changing it. They're not putting a definition of it. It's always gone the other way around. The artist is defining themselves. And of course, that's so obvious in terms of, Instagram and Twitter now. But you'd be amazed how many artists don't have a clear picture of themselves. And I think like that's something that I'm also very careful about. Like, when I talk to people about potential subjects in antimatter, I have the joke of, are they ready for their close-up? Because what that means is, do you have a strong enough sense of self that you can put forward that picture and show me and tell me who you are? That's what I want from the interviews. And, whether I remember when the first iteration of Antimatter came out, people would be like, well, you get the interviews you get because you know the people you interview. And there were a lot of people that I knew when I interviewed, and like, obviously, like Zach De La Rocha wasn't going to tell me all the shit that he told me, like, I think, unless he knew me. Right. So like, I get that. But in this iteration, I would probably say the majority of these people are people that I don't know. Or at least maybe like I've met them, but like I don't really know them, right? Like, but that's what Instagram's made us. Because if you follow someone, they follow you back. Do you know each other? Because you might be acquaintances, but then having a conversation, though, that becomes But it's been interesting, because there are a couple people that I would say like I took a chance on, right? Like, so Grady from Anxious. I love the Anxious record so much. I was kind of like, I don't know, he's pretty young. I can't really find that many interviews with him where I feel like he really shows me who he is. Like, is he ready for this? And I was just like, fuck it, I'm going to take a chance. I love this band so much. I want to do it. And it, like, that interview was amazing.
Yeah.
It was so great. I feel like he felt such a relief being able to like just talk openly about certain things with someone. If I have an edge over anything, it's the fact that I am a musician and I've been playing in bands for 30 plus years. So other band members don't feel like they have to explain things to me in a way that maybe you feel like you have to explain something to someone who hasn't lived it.
What I really liked about the Grady one was, you know, pertinent to what we're saying here, is that he said a few things. And if I remember correctly, he was saying, I feel quite strongly about this now, but I know I might not feel this way in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years.
Right.
That's what I really like about it. And it's interesting how, as a reader, I then get confidence and I'm like, okay, yeah, this thing that's in my head that maybe I'm worried to tell my partner or my friends or my family, maybe I shouldn't be worried, because we're all going to feel different about what we think now in 10 years. And there's a lot of empowerment in that.
I think, you know, if there's been a common theme in both my essays and my interviews, the thing that I think I try to hammer about the most is embracing change, embracing the fact that we do change, that we change our minds, that we change our musical styles, that we change our clothes, that whatever the fuck it is, embrace it. If hardcore did not stylistically change from 1982 in any way, and it was just everything sounded like the Antidote 7-inch or something, I love the Antidote 7-inch, God bless you, but I don't want to hear that for the next 40 years. Like, I would like to think that everyone's going to add their own unique voice and the sound is going to evolve, and we should embrace that, because, you know, that's the Antimatter motto, is the, you know, the whole thing that I, you know, put on a shirt. We believe that hardcore is more than music. It's a real thing to me. Hardcore to me is the people. The music for me has always been the next thing.
What's your relationship with getting paid? And I'm talking about yourself getting paid, obviously, but other artists getting paid, and the contracts, perhaps, or the professional relationships that other bands are having. You know, I'm not sure how much into skateboarding you are, but when Ryan Sheckler was like the Red Bull guy and he was the X Games skater, and he did one commercial, it's called Lynx here, it's called Axe there, you know, the deodorant spray.
Oh yeah.
He did this commercial about 20 years ago, and he just got tore apart for it, you know, on forums and magazines. He was like, who is this kid? Now, if you're a skater and you've come from any different kind of background, whether you've come from a middle-class family or a working-class family, if you're a good skateboarder and you get paid a good sum of money for an advert that lasts a minute and a half, people are going to celebrate you.
Right.
So if you kind of use that lens on music and the way that things have changed so much, I mean, the stuff that I really felt connected to, for example, was Against Me. And when Against Me signed a major label, that was a whole thing. I just feel like that's just kind of drained away now, because either I don't know if homogenous is the right word to use here, but it's just kind of the way that the internet has changed everything in the last 20 years. It is like, well, everyone for themselves. And that's something that I think, as long as you can keep your personality and connection, that's the only thing.
It's weird. If you trace this stuff, like just the other day, I was thinking about this Warzone record, and specifically the song "Don't Forget the Struggle, Don't Forget the Streets." And that song starts with a speech, you know, and where he says, "We believe that hardcore should stay out of big business and stay in the streets where it belongs. All you kids out there, always keep the faith." And at the same time, Don't Forget the Struggle was licensed to Caroline, which is a subsidiary of EMI. So what happened? Right.
Yeah.
So we've sort of had this inconsistency for as long as I can remember. And, you know, in the 90s, when Texas got into our major label bidding war, there was a sense of, you know, obviously what we call punk guilt. The idea that we should not sign to a major label out of just some sort of ambiguous principle. And for a long time, that's sort of what we held on to. But, you know, I think that for us, after a minute, it became a thing of, well, hang on a second. Like, again, I think it went back to survival. It went back to the reality that we were all like 21, 22 years old with no job experience, spending the last bunch of years of our lives playing hardcore shows in a van and living in New York City, one of the most expensive cities in the world. And we're like, you know, these kids that are criticizing us are not paying our rent. And maybe we should think about this. So, you know, for me, there's a real sort of survival aspect to it. And, you know, I've told people this because I think it's funny, but, you know, Ian MacKaye actually told me after the band broke up, he's like, by the way, I don't think there's anything wrong with the fact that you guys signed to a major label. You live in fucking New York City. I get it.
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, I think that we as a community, unfortunately, sometimes think in black and white too much. And I think that it's high time that hardcore went full color, right? Like, I think we need to sort of understand the spectrum of opportunities and the spectrum of choices that we all have to make for ourselves. And I think that that's important. I think, like, so for example, the other week, I ran an interview with Brendan from Turnstile, and someone in the Instagram comments made this, you know, thing about him being a shill for Taco Bell. Mm-hmm. And I was just like, you know, that stuff still just like makes me roll my eyes, because it's just like, I mean, there's irony that you're complaining about him on the Instagram of a person who licensed one of his songs to a Mercedes-Benz commercial in 2002, right? You don't know that, but, you know, if that makes you mad at me, unfollow me.
Was it on Antimatter where someone said that how much money they've spent on Taco Bell on the saver menu, and if the money they get paid is equal or higher to that amount, then they're happy with it?
Kat from Scowl said that.
Great.
And, you know, and that was the thing. Like, I remember I also sold a song to Coca-Cola for a commercial that only aired in Australia, New Zealand, and Thailand. But, you know, it was a decent amount of money. And I was kind of like, you know, number one, I needed it.
Yeah.
Number two, I was like, how can I get self-righteous about this? Literally, do you know how much Diet Coke I drink? Like, I give them so much money. And it's sort of the same with Scowl. There's no way that whatever they paid me was more than I've spent in Diet Coke throughout my life.
I think we just can't live in a way, and I'm sure someone listening to this is being like, you know, that's too much of a broad stroke, but look, we can't really live in London or New York or anywhere in Britain or the States without just giving money to capitalism wherever we go, unless we're out in the forest naked, you know, with a stick, killing deer and eating it over the fire. We can't get away from it.
But this is all to say, like, you know, obviously I'm making light. And at the same time, I understand the foundation of the thinking that takes us there. Because I do think that we do have ethical responsibilities to each other, to the community, to the environment, to the, you know, greater culture. But again, I don't feel like these decisions are black and white. And it's important for us to understand them as personal, like deeply personal decisions, to be able to give people agency and understand that I'm a hardcore kid, but hardcore is not some sort of religious cult. Like there are no, like, you know, there's no one here that's going to punish me You know, I'm not going to hell for if I make a mistake, or, I might make just, maybe I sign up to a record label and, like I just published this interview with Civ, and he was talking about his experience with the band Civ on Atlantic, and he seemed a little regretful about it.
Right.
But okay, he made a decision. He experienced it for himself. He decided this is not for me.
Yeah.
And he grew.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's an amazing trajectory that other people should follow. Not necessarily that exact situation, but that principle, that idea of maybe if something scares you, try it.
Agreed. We contain multitudes, right? We got loads of different pistons going off inside of us, decision making. We can make decisions and live to regret them or learn from them, and I think a lot of this kind of digging when it comes to what we've been talking about, taco commercials and the rest, it probably comes from a good place, right? Because this is a community that we each on an individual level want to protect. So I imagine that's where it comes from. That's where the foundation of it's from.
And I also understand that like my perspective is not, it's probably not that common by virtue of who I am. Meaning that like one of the reasons why when I started Antimatter in 2023, that I thought it was a worthwhile project is because I believe that it's important to have a variety of perspectives. I never, ever want anyone to think that I think the antimatter perspective is the only perspective. This is one perspective, but I think it's an interesting and unique perspective because it's coming from someone who grew up in New York City as a person of color, who is queer, and who has experienced, or at least experienced some of, if not all of, 4 decades of hardcore music, and has thought critically about it and has contributed, both as a writer and as a musician and, as a general community player, right? I think that all of those things mean that my voice, I don't think it should be prioritized, but I think that it should be in the chorus, right? And so when I talk about this stuff, I realize that I'm coming from a slightly jaded perspective because I feel like we've been talking about this for like 40 years. The whole argument about major labels, hardcore's getting too big, all this stuff. And it's just like, is it? Because like we were saying hardcore was getting too big in 1986 in the Donahue show when the New York hardcore scene was on Donahue. And I always remember this because we used to tease Ray Cappo about it. He was being interviewed by Phil Donahue, and the entire scene is around him. So he's got Vinny Stigma and John Bloodclot and Harley Flanagan and Ernie from Token Entry and Chris from the Crumbsuckers, Jimmy Gestapo. I mean, it was like everybody. And for whatever reason, Phil Donahue decides to ask Ray what he thinks of big business coming into the scene. And he's basically sitting next to the Cro-Mags who signed to Profile, which at the time was what we considered big business. And he was like, I'm not saying if it's good or if it's bad. Because there were personal consequences to his answer. But I think the point is that's literally, I looked it up the other day. It's October of 1986, that show. And we're still talking about this, like for real.
I know. And I'm guilty here. I mean, I think life revolves around money. We'll never get away from money. We never will. And so where does it come from? And we have to have some kind of plan.
I agree. And I think that we're having the wrong conversations about money in the scene. And that's why I've tried to have, like, I've done some essays where I've started to broach certain subjects. So for example, there was one essay where I briefly questioned the wisdom of the $5 show, and where I was talking about how because the $5 show to me is very emblematic of a bigger problem, which is that we're creating our ideas of ethics based on completely arbitrary things. $5. Where the fuck does that come from? Right? There's nobody, God didn't hand down $5 shows on the tablets to Moses. It's not right. Like this is literally just a number pulled out of thin air.
Yeah.
And for years, if you played a $6 show, you were a sellout. Right. And it was like, why? What is going on? Where did this number come from? How does this number actually be ethical?
Yeah.
Why is this number the same if it's 5 bands or if it's 3 bands? The number was the same if it was touring bands or if it was local bands. The number was the same if it was a big venue or a VFW hall. It was like, none of that makes sense. You've got to, again, look at the circumstances, understand what's happening here. Maybe we need more money so this poor touring band actually, can afford to eat and not steal from the gas station like I did in 1992.
Yeah.
And so, these things are just like, I realize that now the $5 show doesn't exist mostly. I think it does actually probably in some places, but there are other things like the $5 show, where people cast judgment on ticket prices or on how much you sell your records for or like whatever. And no one is really paying attention to some of the larger questions that I think we need to be asking in 2024. So one of the things that I've been thinking about is, in the 80s, when we talked about ethical pricing, we had all of the aerial view of an ant, right? Like, we did not understand that hardcore, number one, ever stood a chance of being 40 years old. We never understood that some of us are going to grow into old men doing hardcore.
God forbid.
Like, that was like not even, it wasn't even that was like something that would be bad. It was just unimaginable. Right? Because everyone in the scene, if you hung out in the scene in the late 80s or even in the 90s, the oldest person was maybe 30, right? Like 30 was like, wow, you fucking did it. Hooray. But like now we're at a place where I know for a fact there are people at the shows who are almost 60, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, what did we do to protect those people who gave their prime career building, lives, right? Their 20s and their 30s in a van playing for you while you had a great job with a 401k and, retirement and benefits and all the things that you needed to start your family and buy your home and do whatever you do. And then they're 60 years old and they can't get a job. What did we do or what are we doing now to protect those people in our community, to help those people in our community? Why do we have to continue to just throw GoFundMes?
Yeah.
Like, why can't we just think ahead? Why can't we just shut up about like that ticket price costs too much and say, no, you know what? Go home with some fucking money and invest. Because I'm going back to my job on Monday and you gave me a brief reprieve from the bullshit of my job, and that's worth something, right? So I think those are things that just these days, as an older gentleman in the scene, these are things that I didn't think about back then. I really believe more than anything, and again, the reason why I prioritize the people over even the music is because the people are building a world. Hardcore is, when I say hardcore is more than music, it's like, it's a world building exercise. We're trying to create the world that we want to see. And sometimes we fight about it, and that's awesome. That's great.
Yeah.
Like, I
want hopefully learn something out of it.
Absolutely. We'll get better. And we have gotten better over time, right? Yeah. Like, I feel like when you look at the hardcore scene today, just look at me. Like, I'm in a band right now where, like, Thursday, where both of our guitar players are gay.
That's awesome. Yeah. Like, unheard of.
If you had told me that 40 years ago, that you're going to be in a very popular hardcore band as one of 2 gay guitar players. I would have been like, never in a million years, right?
Yeah.
So we've evolved. The scene's evolved. Things have evolved. We've all changed. We've all made room for each other. And we need to continue in that spirit. We need to make room for each other, and we need to sort of like give each other the benefit of the doubt. That's like it sounds stupid, but it's like, that's the easiest way to move this forward.
Hey, it's Kaylee Cuoco for Priceline. Ready to go to your happy place for a happy price? Well, why didn't you say so? Just download the Priceline app right now and save up to 60% on hotels. So whether it's Cousin Kevin's Kazoo Concert in Kansas City, go Kevin, or Becky's Bachelorette Bash in Bermuda, you never have to miss a trip ever again. So download the Priceline app today. Your savings are waiting.
Go to your happy place for a happy price. Go to your happy price, Priceline.
I've always been this kind of person, especially in the workplace, or if I'm new, you know, I'm genuinely enthusiastic, and I'll say I can do things, maybe even when I definitely can't, and sort of, you know, fails ensue. Can I put you on the spot and ask you if there's been a time in the workplace, or playing music, or writing antimatter, where you've just fucked up and you've had to deal with it the best way you can?
Wow.
This is what you've got the best end questions, by the way, for antimatter. So I'm up against it with, you know, not to compare, but I mean, I love your final questions. This one's a bit basic compared to yours.
The problem is that, so, you know, I say this when I interview people in antimatter. I'm like, this is not a podcast, so just take your time. And sometimes, and I did that with Ned, and he literally sat there for 5 minutes in silence thinking.
but you've never heard of editing. I edit these, you know.
Oh, that's a good point. Okay, yeah. I mean, to be fair, a lot of podcasts don't fucking edit.
I know.
So, yeah. I mean, honestly, I would say that, you know, when I think about fucking up, I can only go back to a regret, a deep regret. I guess it's fucking up. And the deep regret that I have is how I quit Texas is the reason. It's not, you know, that's not an in the workplace type thing. It's sort of an exiting the workplace type thing.
Okay.
And I would imagine that if this were a quote unquote real job, that I would probably also regret how that went down. But I was in a very distressed place.
Mm-hmm.
I was, like, being completely frank, 100% suicidal. I was in a horrible place with my mental health. I felt trapped. I was in the closet. I was dying to get out. I was in a situation where it didn't feel like any of my friends were friends anymore. And then I had this other side of the world basically telling me how amazing we were and how we were going to change the world. And it was all the pressures of that, with all of the pressures that were inside of me bubbling up. And they clashed and collided and made me very spontaneously quit. And the way I regret it, and the reason I regret it, is because it happened at the end of a tour. I was able to have the conversation with 2 members of the band on the plane ride home. But one member of the band had elected to stay over in Europe, and he just was like living his life without knowing for days, until I think our lawyer called me up and was like, you've got to call him. You've got to tell him.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just like, okay, find me a number. And so, you know, I do feel like I pulled the rug out, and in a shitty way. And I regret that. Like, I think that, you know, it should have been something that was done at least all at the same time and with a conversation.
Yeah.
And maybe even with me explaining exactly what it was that was coming out in my mind. But I was also like in a bad place because I think I resented people in the band because I was like, why isn't anyone asking me what the fuck is wrong?
It's amazing how what's going on up there can really like actually prevent you from doing something physically, opening your mouth or being whatever that is.
Yeah, it was, I mean, there were like I said, there were so many complicated factors, both externally and internally, that I don't know if I was even capable at that time of handling it in a mature adult way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and it was 1997. So I was 23. Yeah, I don't think I was there yet.
That's young.
Yeah. And so what sucks about that is that I feel like, I damaged relationships basically for a lifetime. And at the same time, I have to be able to say, if I hadn't done that, I honestly think I could have killed myself. So while there's a deep regret, there's also a non-regret. There's also a just being like, I did that the worst way possible, but I'm alive.
Yeah. Yeah. And we know what's more important there.
Yeah. So that's probably where I'd go with that.
Thank you for being so candid.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's great that you can talk about it openly.
I'm really bad at like not talking about things.
Well, I think talking about things has only got to be beneficial, apart from when you upset someone else, and then you have to start apologizing to them.
I actually just had a conversation though with Ian from Military Gun, and we were talking about this a little bit because I was saying he's very open about his life as well, and I was saying that sometimes I will just give myself like unreservedly, but sometimes I feel like I need to feel like the person that I'm giving myself to has skin in the game, right? Like, because otherwise, what is this? Trauma porn? Like, I don't, is this person just titillated by my misfortune?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So there's a sense of like, I think that sharing your experiences is important. Obviously, I do that for a reason. But I think over the years, I've gotten more editorial about it. I sort of, I give myself when I feel like there's a true purpose to doing so.
Right. And I feel like you only know that from experience. I've learned that this is a big lesson, like a bigger than any other lesson I've ever experienced. Like really this end of last year, the last 6 months, I've given myself too much away, and that's kind of sad to say that because I want to be able to freely share myself. And when I think something, say it. When I have a love for something, I want to say it without being left vulnerable or knowing that I could get trodden on. It's good to take your own lesson. That's
sort of what I was saying about hardcore in a lot of ways. When I'm talking about like giving people the benefit of the doubt and making room for people and sort of like, it's the way you do that is by creating a culture of trust and safety, right? Like where we all feel some level of trust with each other and we all feel some level of safety with each other. And when we allow ourselves to live in that type of environment, that's when we all grow. That's when we all become the best versions of ourselves. And if we can't give each other that, then what are we the alternative to?
Yeah.
How is this a subculture anymore?
Yeah.
At this point, 2024, the only thing a subculture can do is provide you trust and safety because everything out there is the opposite of that.
It's true. I think in that sense, I mean, from what I've seen of sort of Gen Y, Gen Z, that kind of stuff and that allowing that allowance of saying things and be like, oh, actually, I was wrong there. And then that kind of colloquial forgiveness is something that I see that we could learn from, I think.
Absolutely. I think, that's the other thing too, that I think is so important and that we don't maybe talk about or do enough, but being able to just let each other fuck up is the deepest kind of love.
Yeah. Big time. So there he was, Norman Brannon, being very candid at the end there. I enjoyed that conversation. I enjoyed hearing about Norman's life. I kind of regret asking him about the sellout thing. I mean, obviously it's such a big conversation, especially in punk, hardcore, alternative circles. But actually, I find the whole fucking thing pretty labouring and boring. I don't know why I asked. So there's that. Interesting guy. Great to hear him. Antimatter, one of my favourite things that I get through my emails. Speaking of which, you can sign up to my newsletter at 101parttimejobs.com. Less articulate or eloquent as Norman's, but with mine, you get to hear about all my foibles as a teenager and in my 20s, as well as to catch up on those episodes. Thank you so much for listening to 101. Shout out to all of you. Cheers for being here. Next week, we've got parts 1 and 2 with Joe Talbot from Idols. We did some live shows last week, and they went better than I thought they would. I was pretty nervous. I didn't really know how it was going to be, but ended up being pretty fun and funny. So I hope you tune in. See you then.
With Lucky Land Slots, you can get lucky just about anywhere.
Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to... Has anyone seen the bride and groom?
Sorry, we're here. We were getting lucky in the limo and we lost track of time.
No, Lucky Land Casino, with cash prizes that add up quicker than a guest registry.
In that case, I pronounce you lucky.
Play for free at LuckyLandSlots.com. Daily bonuses are waiting. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18+. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.